Hello and good afternoon. Welcome everyone to another immigration webinar. I am Hayley Pickard with Basham Shaw Immigration Law Group, and I'm here with immigration attorney Allison Lukanich. How are you doing, Allison?
Great. How about you?
I am fabulous. So today is Citizenship Day. So that just means that is a day recognized by the U.S. for, U.S. citizenship and all the responsibilities that come along with being a U.S. citizen. So this correlates really nicely with our topic for today. So I'm really excited about that. So just to preface for everyone, our talk today is going to be about helpful hints and frequently asked questions that we see related to applying for citizenship. If you would like a basic overview of applying for citizenship, we have blogs and videos available on our website and on our YouTube page that you can easily access. But this is going to go into a little bit more specific questions that we have seen that pertain to applying for citizenship and kind of the process of it. Okay, Allison, you ready?
Yes, let's go ahead.
Awesome. So we can just start off, what are the eligibility requirements to apply for U.S. citizenship?
So the basic requirements, you must have your green card for at least 5 or 3 years if you're married to a U.S. citizen. You must have 5 or of that 5 years, you need to have both continuous presence and physical presence. So that's where a lot of people really get mixed up. So physical presence is the amount of time that you're physically spent in the United States. So the rule of thumb for that is you must be physically present on US soil for half of that 5 or 3 year period. What continuous presence means, though, is just being continually present in the United States as a lawful permanent resident. So certain actions by you can cause breaks in that continuous presence, specifically by being abroad. So for those that end up spending more than 6 months in a single trip outside of the country will have a break in their continuous presence. Historically, depending on the reason for that extended trip, whether a re-entry permit was filed, you could still potentially file, but the current administration is following what's called the 4 years and 1 day rule, where if you have a break in your continuous presence over that 5 year period of eligibility, you must reestablish continuous presence, for 4 years and 1 day before you're eligible to file. So that is kind of a big issue that comes up a lot with my frequent international travelers, or where people are kind of living half of their time here, half of their time abroad back in their home country. So that continuous presence can be a bit tricky to figure out. The only other major requirement is that you are a person of good moral character in the 5 or 3 year period immediately prior to your application. So it doesn't need to be the entire length of time you've had your green card status, just in that window immediately prior to filing. Good moral character is a little bit tricky. It's not exactly defined anywhere. There are a couple circumstances under our immigration laws that will automatically eliminate your ability to have good moral character. But for the most part, it's about demonstrating that you're a law-abiding citizen, that you're filing taxes, that you are not committing crimes or being arrested, that you are paying your traffic tickets, even just little things that just show you're following the daily rules in society. And really those are kind of the basic requirements.
Yeah, I'm really excited because a lot of our questions kind of center around those, because there's just so many questions offshoots from that. So for someone who has their green card and they are married to a US citizen, so if they didn't get their green card through their marriage, could they still apply? So say they get their green card through employer, but they are married to a US citizen. Do they have to get their green card through their spouse to be able to apply the 3 year versus the 5 year?
No. So in that scenario, they could file in the 3 year window. But the issue is you have to be married then for 3 years. So most people that marry a US citizen end up being sponsored by that spouse, of course. So it needs to be 3 years from the time the green card is approved. But if an individual gets their green card through whether the diversity lottery, an employer, or some other avenue, they can qualify in 3 years so long as they are married during that 3 year period. So they can't marry a US citizen a year and a half into having their green card and then file at that 3 year window, if that makes sense. So if you didn't get your green card through your spouse, you need to be married. You need to have green card status for 3 years and be married to and living with your spouse for 3 years before you qualify.
Gotcha. Okay. And so when someone applies for US citizenship and they go through the process, do you have to give up this? Does the US require that you give up citizenship of your other country?
Great question. And everyone gets this wrong, but no, the United States does allow dual citizenship. So if you have, and I've had clients sometimes that have three passports, they just have multiple citizenships from either naturalizing themselves through their parents. You do not have to give anything up by becoming a US citizen. The question becomes, though, does your native country or your country of citizenship allow it? There are quite a few countries around the world that do not. So by naturalizing, you potentially could lose your native citizenship, but the United States allows dual citizenship and you are not giving anything up by becoming a US citizen.
Yeah, I remember getting that wrong with a friend who was, I think, a German citizen. And I was like, oh, the US totally requires that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so wrong. So yeah, that's very interesting. And I know a lot of people get that wrong, even US citizens.
Mhm.
Awesome. Okay, so moving on to the exemptions for the English language test. So that's a section in the N400. So can we talk about who is eligible for exemptions for the English language test?
So, and this is actually one requirement that I should have mentioned and I didn't. So, one other requirement of filing for citizenship is English fluency. Basically, you have to be able to read and write a sentence in English, and you have to answer questions on the history and government of the United States. So, there are, as Haley just said, there are a couple different exemptions to that. So, it depends on your age and the length of time that you have had green card status. So, if you are 55 and older and had your green card for 15 years, or 50 and older and had your green card for 20 years, you are exempt from the English requirement. So what that means is you do not need to read and write in English, and you still have to answer those civics questions, but you can do those through an interpreter in your native language. So a lot of clients, especially sometimes some lower educated clients that aren't fully literate in their own languages, of course, learning English from a reading and writing is a very high burden sometimes. So simply waiting that length of time until they reach that age and that length of time with their green card. There is one other exemption that if they are 65 and older and they've had the green card at least 15 years, not only is the English reading and writing exempted, but in terms of the civics questions, there are less questions to study and they're the easier questions. So these history and civics questions, there's 100 questions total. The answers have not changed in at least the 8-9 years that I've been helping people with citizenship applications. The only answers that change, of course, there are questions: who's the president, who's the governor of your state? So those will change with elections. But aside from that, these questions have not changed, at least about the last decade or so. So if you are 65 and older and had your green card at least 15 years, you only need to study 20 questions as opposed to that list of 100. So just to make it a little bit easier, and those questions are kind of earmarked. The only other exemption, so there is also what's called a disability waiver. So there are certain individuals out there through some sort of, mental disability, a cognitive disability, of course, simply don't have the capacity to answer these questions. So there is that waiver available to them. It needs to be signed by typically their diagnosing physician, whether it's a medical issue, maybe a psychiatrist if it's a mental issue, and that is filed with the application, or it's presented at the interview for someone that lacks, again, someone like, for example, with Alzheimer's, who just simply can't recall this information. Unfortunately, the disability waivers are really hard to get approved in the current administration. So, it really depends. There's some people that will hear about the disability waiver based on maybe a diagnosis of being dyslexic, for example. And I've heard stories, not personal through my cases, but heard stories of the local offices, the local field offices not granting that waiver and forcing the individual with a severe learning disability to go ahead and answer regardless. So if you want to try to request the disability accommodation, I highly recommend working with an attorney just to make sure that waiver is filed appropriately and you're putting the best arguments forward to make sure it gets granted.
Awesome. Yeah. So Thank you for answering all of those. That is very thorough. You really got it. So for information about residents, I think this is going to be really pertinent right now, but I know we get this first question quite often. So do you have to list, or as the applicant, do they have to list every single place that they have lived in the past 5 years? And then kind of also, what if they don't, or what if they accidentally they leave something out and send it off? Kind of what are the ramifications?
So yes, you do. As I talked about the initial requirements, they're looking back specifically to establish good moral character for the last 5 years. So they want your address history, they want your employment history. You do have to disclose all of that. This information is requested on the form, and it's reasonable considering the law that sets out how to qualify for citizenship. It's a part of the underlying background checks that they do to verify, everything that you put on the application is truthful. Now, every once in a while, I will have clients, really poor memories. It's hard to remember old addresses. It's about being as specific as possible. And honestly, myself as an attorney, I won't file an application that doesn't have full 5-year address history. There are other applications in the immigration context that make you go back from when you were 16 years old. We're talking 20, 30, 40, 50 years of address history. So if it's required on certain forms to go back that far, you can go back 5 years and get it, is really my kind of attitude about that, because the internet is out there. You can check with your tax records, you can check with Social Security. There are lots of ways to find your mailing address the last 5 years.
Awesome. So I know this is a very pertinent question. You kind of touched on it. For those who are currently stuck outside of the US because of COVID related being unable to come back, but they had wanted to apply for citizenship, kind of where are they at currently with being able to apply for citizenship?
So the issue, again, what I was talking about earlier, this idea of continuous presence. And for those that have been out for 6 months or more are going to have a legal break in their continuous presence. So the current administration has really strictly implemented this 4-year-and-a-day rule. So that would effectively reset the clock for these individuals. However, we don't know. Obviously, COVID has greatly changed all of our lives in a lot of different ways, and it's possible that policies could be updated to reflect these kind of circumstances. But for right now, they're really strictly following the letter of that law. So unfortunately for those individuals, once they get back, the clock will reset. And regardless of how long they've had their green card, they're going to have to wait 4 years and 1 day from the date they re-entered to qualify to file.
So that means that they probably wouldn't be able to vote in this election. Gotcha.
No, definitely not.
So gotten through the N400, we've, up from putting all of our biographic information in. So we get to those additional information questions. There's tons of yes, no ones. So I know that some people have come to us and they'll say, if you answer yes to, say, the question like, have you ever been placed in alternative sentencing or rehabilitative program, or ones around criminal conviction, if you say yes, or if you're going to have to say yes, does that kind of immediately mean you should involve an attorney, or is that something that can be handled on their own?
So if you have to say yes to any of the questions on the N400, you need to hire an attorney. Okay. We are living in a very anti-immigrant administration right now, potentially only for maybe a few more months, but maybe another 4 years. We don't know. And this administration has really changed a lot of policies within USCIS, where we are seeing unprecedented numbers of N400 denials. So if there is anything that the agency as a whole can hang their hat on an application to deny someone, they're going to do it. Mm-hmm. So if you looking through this, just hire an attorney. Like attorneys, we are here to help people. We are here to advocate for you, to attend the interview and really explain to the officer why the reason you had to put yes, especially a criminally related question, is not so bad. Especially, Hayley, since you mentioned this idea of alternative sentencing, rehabilitative programs. So at least in North Carolina, where I'm licensed, there are all sorts of different, if someone has a criminal issue, there is what's called a deferred prosecution agreement that you enter with the district attorney, where you're basically pleading guilty to a crime, but you're serving probation before the judge looks at anything. The judge has made no determination as to your guilt, but you admit that you're guilty. You do probation. And at the end of your probation, whether it's attending classes, community service, paying a fine, whatever that may be, if you completed the probation to the satisfaction of the district attorney, they dismiss the charges against you. So for criminal purposes, those charges are dismissed. You no longer have a you never had a conviction. For immigration purposes, though, it's that admission of guilt that the district attorney makes you do to enter into the program is considered a conviction. So there's a lot of people that come to me and they come with their court paperwork and they say, but it was dismissed and then I got it expunged and it's not, I don't need to say yes. Well, yes, you do. You need to be honest, because immigration consequences, and we could do a whole other, I could talk for an hour about immigration consequences of criminal convictions and what these different programs mean and how that interplays. But especially if you've had criminal history in the really ever, but specifically in the last 5 years, you need to consult with an attorney. Just because your criminal defense attorney told you it's dismissed, we'll get it expunged, it's no big deal. The rules are different when it comes to crimes and immigrants. So you really need to take care, not just answer what you think, because I can't tell you how many consults I do of individuals who either get a denial on their N-400 or they call me after a really, really tough interview and they're like, it was dismissed. Why are they giving me such a hard time about it? And I'm looking and I'm like, but this is a conviction. Yeah. So that sort of stuff is really, really important. If there's, and not just, I mean, the form itself, it has about 6 pages of yes or no questions, as you said, about, have you ever been a communist? Have you ever trafficked weapons? Have you joined a terrorist organization? Now, you wouldn't have gotten your green card if you had done the vast majority of these things. But again, if there's anything in there that gives you pause that you do need to truthfully answer, and the answer is yes, please consult with an attorney, because I'm not saying you don't qualify, but you may need additional help to know how to explain the situation first, to know how to answer those questions and paint it in a positive light, but to potentially have someone at the interview with you to advocate on your behalf and explain why this conviction or why this issue is really no big deal.
Okay, awesome. So for those who are in the selective service, or for men who are between the ages of 18 and 26, they have to apply for the selective service. So if a client comes to you and they are 24, they haven't signed up for the selective service, can they still apply for citizenship?
Yes, if they file for selective service. So selective service is our military draft in the United States. It has not been used since the Vietnam War. So like 50 years now. But it is a requirement that all men in the United States between the ages of 18 and 26 file for the selective service. So if there were another massive war and we had to conscript men, they're available. The information is in there. So if you failed to register, once you got green card status, you're between those ages, go ahead and register. And I'm sorry, can you hear my dogs? They're going a little nuts downstairs. So go ahead and register. And once you get proof of that registration, which you can file the registration online, and then they send you a confirmation letter in the span of like a week or two. It's very, very quick. Then you can file. The issue comes from men between the ages of 26 and 31. So you cannot register after you're 26 years old. Well, once you turn 26, you cannot register. So for men between the ages of 26 and 31, they are then in that 5-year good moral character window. So they're no longer able to register for the selective service. They missed that. But now USCIS has a reason to deny them because they're within 5 years of good moral character. So there's a couple different things that we can do. Sometimes we just simply advise, wait until you're 31 and then file, because now this issue is past 5 years. They're not going to come at, it was your mistake. It was an honest mistake. You didn't know of the requirement. Some people still do move forward and file. I do have a couple cases pending right now, so I'll probably learn in a couple months as these cases are adjudicated what the decision of the office is. But I do find that as long as there's kind of a legitimate reason, true ignorance about this requirement, they really should be okay. I will advise people though, so I have found in the last couple of years, these various immigration agencies, whether it be USCIS or the National Visa Center, if you're filing for an immigrant visa, they're all putting out advisals now about the requirement to file or to register with the selective service. So what I'm imagining is going to happen in a couple of years, individuals that they have documented, received these advisals and still failed to register are not going to qualify until they're outside that statutory period, because we told you about it, you still failed to do it, what's your excuse? So, but definitely go ahead and register. The Selective Service website is actually really easy to navigate. You just need to register. You need your date of birth, social security number, full name, and it's pretty straightforward.
Awesome. And then, so we've gotten through all of that, and then we get to the oath of allegiance. So that's the part where it says, will you take up arms for the US or on behalf of the country? Can anyone say no to any part of the oath of allegiance?
So there are religious exemptions. They call them conscientious objectors. So if your religion dictates that you cannot join the military, you cannot touch firearms. The Quakers are kind of one religion that pops into my head. You can sign a waiver of those specific requirements, but USCIS can request documentation of that. So you can't just conveniently join the Quaker Church, a week before you take the oath. It needs to, you need to be able to demonstrate this is a deeply held religious value. This is what you were either raised with or that you have subscribed to for a number of years. So there are those exemptions in there, but they're very few and far between, and it does need to be a legitimate exemption. You can't just say it because it's convenient, because you don't want that idea of having to be conscripted into the military. So as long as it's a legitimate reason and you can document it and you are active in that faith, then yes, you can get that exempted.
Awesome. So you filed the N-400, waiting on USCIS. So currently, obviously things are a little wonky because of COVID, but how long are you seeing it take for people to receive citizenship?
Great. I wish you didn't ask me this. No idea. Every field office, so if the field office is the USCIS jurisdiction where you live, every field office is a little bit different. In our office, our local field office is in Raleigh. We have cases that we filed before the pandemic kind of shut down that are just now being interviewed. We actually have a few cases that we filed in the midst of the pandemic that are scheduled for interview coming up. So some cases are actually pretty quick right now. It's only taking a couple months. Personally, I think it depends on when the person received green card status, because if it's a much older file and it's not yet digitized, it seems to take those cases longer to get sent over for scheduling. Whereas if you just got your green card 3 or 5 years ago, it was within their new electronic system and all the records are right there, they'll schedule you pretty quickly. So it is kind of a toss up. It really depends on your history, your case, when you file. But I would say, I think the posted times are like 6 to 15 months in our local office, maybe 8 to 15 months. And it takes a lot longer in a lot of other jurisdictions. New York can take almost 2 years. So the sooner you file, you hold your place in line. You of course are a green card holder. This is a question I get all the time. After I file, then what's my status? So you're a green card holder while the case is pending. So if you need to travel internationally, whatever you need to do, you are fine to do that. You just have to update the office with the officer when you're being interviewed with those new travel dates, but you are same you've always been until there's a final decision.
Okay. So then for like the local offices that you're saying each of them are kind of doing a little bit different for how they're handling naturalization interviews and oaths.
Oath ceremonies, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, oath ceremonies.
Yeah, everything's a little bit different. So right now, again, because of COVID, they are doing same day oath ceremonies. So so traditionally you would go to your interview. If you pass the English and civics test and you meet all the other requirements, they would tell you, congratulations, it all looks good. And then a few weeks to months later, you receive your oath ceremony notice and you go back and it's a nice little ceremony, bring your friends and family and you take the oath. And at that point, you're a citizen. Now, because of COVID, at least at our local office, they are holding same day ceremonies. I was actually at the office a few weeks ago and I kind of witnessed one just through the window, but they're just having everyone stand, 6 feet apart. And it's a little bit rushed. Unfortunately, it takes some of the fanfare and excitement out of it because you can't have friends and family there. But I think that they're doing it to eliminate people coming in and out. You already have to be there for the interview. So why not just take care of everything while you're here and you're done? You don't need to come back. There's nothing else. So I think it's great, especially for those that are being scheduled if they can get their voter registration in on time to register to vote in the upcoming election. It's wonderful. But it does unfortunately take a little bit of that celebration out of it.
Yeah, definitely. So then I know that just kind of winding down, I'm just going to ask a few final questions. I know we see now, there's an option to file online. So have you found, or do you know if there is a benefit between filing online versus filing in paper?
There's not. Their cases are processed really the same. I only file on paper because when you're working with an attorney, the online system is really not friendly to attorneys, and the requirements we have to get our names added to cases to demonstrate that we're legally licensed and ethically able to represent an individual, but two, that this individual agrees to our representation. So it's a lot harder to get our name kind of attached to a case when we file online. There is that process, but like I said, there's no preferential treatment given to one way or the other. My case is processed just as quickly as, the kind of blogs and things that I follow that say, oh, well, I got scheduled for interview within, 4 months. Well, my cases on paper are scheduled that quickly too. So if you're working with an attorney, they may opt for paper filing because it makes things a little bit easier just from a paperwork standpoint for our office, but there is that online option available as well.
Okay, awesome. And then I think this one, for the civics guide, for the study for the civics guide, you can probably just Google USCIS civics guide and it should come up easily. I think I've done that before for someone and it came up pretty, like the first link. So I know that we can.
Yes, it's very available. Typically when you go, so after you file, you get a biometrics notice, so a fingerprint notice. And typically in the biometrics locations, they have these books with all the questions printed in them. So you can ask them for that. And typically they give it out freely. Sometimes they'll run out and you can ask them if they have any. If they don't though, all of these materials, the study materials are available online. They're very accessible.
Awesome. Well, for our final remarks, I just did want to say, everyone, don't forget the fees for USCIS are going to be changing on October 2nd. For online, it's going from $640 to $1160, and from paper, it's going from $640 to $1170. So if you're thinking about toying around with applying for U.S. citizenship, we really encourage you, if you don't want to have to pay that significant increase, to do it before October 2nd. That's really key. And if you want to be able to vote in this election, definitely, you already kind of missed your chance, but before that significant change, because unfortunately, just kind of how USCIS fees are working, they're going to keep increasing. So, before that big jump, we do encourage, and we have been encouraging clients to apply for U.S. citizenship before that October 2nd date.
Absolutely. That's really important. It's over a $500 increase. So get those applications in now if you can. And just to kind of add on about voting. So unfortunately, if you haven't filed yet, there's just no way that your case will be. I don't know what the cutoff voter registration deadline is, but you're not going to be able to get there in time. But please encourage your friends and family, your U.S. citizen people that out there, just to vote. It's really important this election, regardless of your political beliefs and convictions and who you support. Having your voice, and you as an individual, if you don't have citizenship, but those who represent you and those who want to advocate on your behalf, your 18-year-old children, make them vote, please. So it's really, really important now more than ever that everyone gets out the vote. So if you have any questions for us as well about registration, finding your ballot, we'd be more than happy to pass along that information, those resources out there as well.
Definitely would. Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us through our website, boshamshaw.com. You can also reach out to us on our Facebook page, Boshamshaw Immigration Law Group. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.